Hello everybody! Today I'm going to compare some cheap and some expensive gouache. You've probably heard about this brand already. For the cheap gouache I'm going to use handmade jelly gouache. And today I'm going to send Holbein into the battle to compete with those. So, like I said, we're gonna use the handmade jelly gouache and all of the Holbein colors that I have here. And I'm gonna use the same palette for both of these. And my fingers are already stained from washing the palette. Artist watercolor paper and then a little bit of tape so that we can get clean borders and everything will look a little bit prettier. Here we have the reference picture. It's a Studio Ghibli scene, I think from the movie Arrietty, and that movie is just so insanely beautiful, so check it out. This is not sponsored, I wish. And now I'm starting to prepare the palette and start to paint. So the first layer, green, different green tones. Honestly, with this kind of painting, it doesn't matter if it is a clean layer or we can have some strokes. And if I use cheaper gouache, I use those streaks that they often create to my advantage. So with the grass, you can see that I went in the direction that the grass is gonna go later on. So you're not gonna be able to see any flaws of the paint. This is what I would do with some cheaper, lower quality gouache. And since we have that here, I was just trying to do my best to use it to its advantages, which is why most people on Instagram were actually unable to tell which one is the cheap and which one is the expensive gouache. I guess I'm just a little bit too good at using them. I don't know, but maybe with these kinds of paintings, it's just really hard to tell from the finished piece. But there are a few differences in the painting process, and this is why I'm here and doing this video, so you can see those differences happening while I'm painting, because that's probably the only time you're gonna be able to see this. Right off the bat, I noticed the gouache is not that opaque. Some colors are very transparent. Really depends on the colors. The more white you mix into them, the more opaque they get. That's very typical for gouache, especially for cheaper brands. So if you love pastel colors, this is good because then you just add white and it becomes more opaque if you want that opacity. Most of the time with gouache, we do not want transparent layers because if we want transparency, we just go for watercolors. There's a video that I did about the differences between the different media. So if you are unaware of those, then check that video out. And here I'm just trying to use this gouache to its fullest potential. And I think that the reference picture that I used kind of played into the cards of this one. Here you can see it's fairly opaque because I added in a lot of white to the green. And I've heard from a lot of people say that with the handmade gouache, it really depends on the colors that you use. Some colors have a better quality than others. Here you can see it with the orange. The orange was really bad, to be honest. You can see the green through a lot. Also with the pink, you can kind of see through the dark spots. It wasn't that bad. And then with the light pink, you can see it went on much better, obviously because I added the white. So really depends on what you're gonna do, what you want to achieve. And I think with this painting it's really easy to hide the flaws because it's so intricate, it has so many details, and with all of those layers and details I was able to hide that. You can see, for example, now that the green is shining through so much where the orange is, but I'm gonna add so much layers later on that it's gonna be much harder to tell that it was very cheap gouache. Here I made a little bit of a mistake because I didn't want to paint the person that was in the reference picture and thought it was a rock because I only saw the foot because I cropped the picture, but then realized it was the person, so I removed that again. And now I'm starting to do all of the little details, and this is where it really shines because then you can really hide all of the flaws. I mean, in reality, if I had more time, I could have added even more details and make it look even better. but that's always a time issue. And the simpler your painting is, the more layered or flat layers you have, I would say, the easier it's gonna be to tell that you have cheaper gouache. So for example, with one of the paintings that I did where I tried Lucas gouache colors, which is also a fairly cheap brand, I realized that it was almost impossible to get flat layers and I had to use a lot of layers. So it really depends on the kind of painting that you do. If you would like to learn how to paint the landscape with gouache, then check out my new gouache course where you can learn step by step how to recreate this painting. The link for the course is in the description box below. So now I've cleaned out the palette again and we are setting the palette for the other half of the painting. And I'm squeezing out the Holbein gouache. I have a few colors, so this is more of a limited palette because those are fairly expensive. I don't own a huge set, so I just went with what I had here. And you can already tell, I think I can already tell on the gray area how smooth that layer is. Even though it was very washed down, they acted almost like watercolors for the first layer, and they have a completely different consistency from the Hemi gouache. You have to add way less water to them to use them, which means that you're gonna have a much more opaque finish, much less streaky. And while that might not affect the end result, as you can see with this painting, it really affects the process. I had a much easier, much more fun time with these. I mean, which is to be expected with the price difference, and really depending on where you live, the price difference might be bigger or less big. But honestly, you can really tell that these are the more expensive ones. Especially for a beginner, it would probably be much easier to work with those. If you have had a problem with gouache and it didn't do what you wanted to, maybe try a small set of the Holbein and see if it works better, because you might get better results. See how opaque this white especially is here. It is just so smooth like butter and so much fun to paint with. And I was a little bit tired at this point, I assume, and so I think that the left part looks a little bit less good than the right part, which is probably why people assumed that the left part was the cheap gouache, but it's honestly just probably my fault because I was kind of tired at this point. But you can see that I toned down the green actually so it would fit with the other side, because the Holbein is much more vibrant than the Hemi gouache. So here you can see it, the orange goes on perfectly. You can't see the previous layer even though it was fairly dark. And it's much harder to get dull colors when you mix. The only reason why the flowers, the pink flowers, don't pop as much is because I didn't have a magenta in my set. So I just used red and white, which is not ideal, but again, I used what I had here. And if you were to use the same colors, it would look even more vibrant. And again, I had to tone it down. So now let's remove the paint and see how it all looks. Honestly, I think once the paint is gone, it looks like you're looking through a window, and so I think it's actually quite pretty, and I would encourage you to try something like this. And here you can see more of a close-up. I don't know if you can spot the differences in those two paints. And something that is also worth a mention here is that the Holbein is probably light fast, whereas the Hemi is probably not, which means that the Hemi will probably fade over time. So now that I'm finished with the painting, I put it on my wall, and if I don't forget, I will report back in a few months or maybe even a year to see if the cheap gouache has already faded. I will keep you updated on that. I've had this song stuck in my head for days now. A good Hard these days, it's hard to find true love, the lasting kind. Please, all of the record labels, reach out to me because I'm about to launch my music career with this insane talent that I have.